In the grounds of Lincoln Castle, atop of the Lucy Tower, is a small gravestone, identical in shape to the ones around it, marked simply WC 1877. Beneath it lies the body of William Clarke, the last man to be hanged at the castle. William Clarke was a poacher, a bully, and an all-round bad sort, who always carried with him a stout stick to beat anyone who annoyed him. He was the leader of a gang of ruffians who obeyed him, not through love or loyalty, but through fear and loathing. Fear of his vile temper and loathing of his vicious stick. Wherever Clarke went, there followed a few paces behind him his faithful dog, a skinny lurcher. It had often felt the weight of Clarke's stick, and its back was scarred and bent from the beatings. Clarke and his dog could often be found, if anyone wanted to find them, in the bar of the Strugglers' Inn, in the shadow of the castle walls. The lean dog would squeeze itself under a chair or skulk in a tight corner, gazing nervously at its master, while Clarke would lean on the bar, elbows spread, clearing a great space around him. If ever Clarke's eye fell on the terrified dog, it would wag its tail frantically and yelp in a most pathetic manner, a mixture of fear and hope. Fear that Clarke had taken it into his mind to beat the animal, as he often did, and hope that he might for once show some affection to the faithful animal. For in the old town this poor mistreated dog was the only living creature which cared a jot whether Clarke lived or died. One evening, as Clarke was drinking in the bar of the Strugglers' Inn, he noticed that it had gone strangely quiet. Turning around, he was confronted by two constables who had come to arrest him over the death of a gamekeeper. Clarke pulled out his trusty stick, but it was to no avail. The constables in their turn pulled out truncheons, and after a short and vicious struggle, Clarke was carried, bloody and unconscious, to the gaol within the prison. Clarke was indicted for murder. He had shot a gamekeeper while out poaching with his gang, and the man, after seeming to recover for a few days, had developed gangrene. The surgeons lopped off limb after limb in an attempt to save him, but he eventually died in dreadful pain a month or so later. After Clarke's arrest, his gang, fearing for their safety, turned what was known as Queen's Evidence, so that after making a full confession, laying the majority of the blame on Clarke, they were not prosecuted for their part in the crime. Against the confessions of his gang, Clarke could make no defence. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Clarke's dog now had nowhere to go, and would skulk around the walls of the castle, looking forlornly for its master. Sometimes it would scratch around the door of the Strugglers' Inn and stare into the bar, expecting perhaps to find him there, but the landlord chased it away, for it reminded his customers of the loathsome villain Clarke, and could not be tolerated. Indeed, it would have starved had it not been for the kindness of the landlord's wife, who gave it the odd scrap of gristle or stale bread, hiding her kind act by throwing it at the animal's head and shouting, "And I hope it chokes you." Even though public executions had long ago been abandoned, people would still gather on the morning of an execution. They would congregate first in Castle Square to watch the hangman come from his lodgings, carrying, as he always did, the little black bag, which contained the prisoner's shackles and the noose. Then they would go to the Strugglers' Inn, drinking and laughing on the street outside, for here in times past it had been possible to see the hanging itself. Pie sellers and chapmen selling copies of the condemned man's last confession would do a roaring trade until a few minutes before 7 o'clock, for then a nervous silence would fall over the crowd as they imagined the scene inside the prison. The hangman entering the condemned cell, shackling the man's hands behind him. The grim procession to the new drop. The priest chanting prayers at the front, the hangman adjusting the noose at the back, and then the final moments. The hood over the head, the lever pulled, the fall, the snapping of neck bones, and the creaking of the gallows as the corpse swung slowly to and fro. The people outside were of course generally ignorant of the actual moment of death, but traditionally took the chiming of the cathedral clock as a sign that the deed was done. But that day they all knew the exact moment when the felon died. For suddenly Clarke's dog, which had been sniffing around the crowd, begging for scraps, began to whimper dreadfully, its body rigid in fear, staring at the castle as if it could see through the walls, could see its master, his hands bound, stumbling, trembling, towards the gallows. At a few minutes before 7, the dog suddenly went rigid, tilted back its head, and let out such a mournful howl that it chilled the blood of every soul that heard it. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that it was this, and not the striking of the clock which marks the moment that Clarke had been launched into eternity. After this eerie incident, Clarke's dog became a veritable celebrity in the Bailgate, and was now as welcome in the strugglers as it had been reviled before. People would come from miles around to see Clarke's amazing dog. The animal itself did not enjoy its new elevated status, however, for it looked even more miserable now that its master had gone, and grew even thinner than before, despite the landlord offering it the choicest morsels to tempt its appetite, and the wife continuing to throw rotten scraps at its head and shout, "I hope it chokes you." Eventually the poor animal died, but the landlord, not wishing to lose such an attraction, had it stuffed and displayed behind the bar for many years. The spirit of the dog could not rest, and it had haunted the walls of the castle for many years. Sometimes it returned, to the strugglers' inn at midnight, and the landlord and landlady would lie terrified in their beds as they heard the scratching and whining of the ghostly dog at their front door. Many years passed. The landlord and landlady had long gone. Even the story of Clarke and his amazing dog had faded from the memory of Lincoln folk. Occasionally there was a scratching sound at midnight, but the new landlord of the Strugglers' Inn paid no attention to it, thinking it was probably rats, and the old stuffed dog in the bar, dusty and decayed now, one glass eye missing, was thrown away. Yet occasionally, on dark and stormy nights, late revellers still see the figure of that skinny dog lurking beneath the castle walls. It tilts back its head and opens its mouth and lets out such a dreadful mournful howl that it chills the blood of the drunkard, filling his heart with such dread that he goes home a sober, sadder man. Right, okay, everyone. So that's the full story of William Clarke and the ghostly dog at the Strugglers' Inn in Lincoln. So I'm sorry I made a little bit of a mistake there, but I am new to this really, so yep. So what I shall do, I shall be doing these stories when I can, and I'll be going out if I can. I'll be busy tomorrow though, and we'll just see how things go. But yeah, and I'll see how these stories go as well. So thank you for listening, and I shall be back on again soon. So thank you. Good night.